There is one man alive in the 41st millennium who could end the galaxy's oldest argument with a single sentence. Belisarius Cawl has lived for 10,000 years. He served at the side of the Emperor's own loremasters in the days of the Great Crusade. He carries gene-craft secrets that even the Emperor classified. He rebuilt the entire Adeptus Astartes from the ground up. Every Primaris Marine alive is the product of research he has been running, in secret, since before the Heresy ended. He resurrected a Primarch. And in all that time, across all that knowledge, on the one subject the entire Imperium whispers about, the two erased sons, the second and the 11th, the Lost Primarchs, Belisarius Cawl has said exactly nothing. Not a denial, not a hint. Nothing. You can believe that the most knowledgeable being in the Imperium, a man who has spent 10,000 years collecting forbidden truths, simply doesn't know the answer to the most famous question in the setting. Or you can believe the far more disturbing thing, that he knows, that he has always known, that the answer is buried in the same sealed research that made the Primaris Marines, sealed by the same hand, and that Cawl's silence isn't a gap in his knowledge. It's the most important thing he's protecting. None of this is provable in any way that would satisfy an inquisitor holding the evidence bag. What follows is built from what Cawl has done, what he has studied, and what his own construct confessed to Robute Gilliman in a sealed chamber 200 decks below the bridge of the McCragg's Honor. The evidence is circumstantial and structural. The case holds it's also damning. Begin with the archive itself, because the archive is the argument. Belisarius Cawl holds titles no other being in the Adeptus Mechanicus has accumulated simultaneously. Archmagos Dominus, Dominatus Dominus, Master of Masters, Prime Conduit of the Omnissiah. He was born in the Genovat facilities of Xanthi Terra on Mars in late M30, a vat-grown child who was speaking Gothic proficiently within hours of emerging from his birthing chamber, already demonstrating fluency in multiple dialects of Binharic before he reached the end of the intake queue. Where other vat children stood silent, he was asking questions. He was sent through the center door, the one rarely used, and he understood what that selection meant before anyone explained it to him. He spent the following years doing something the Adeptus Mechanicus of the 41st millennium has largely forgotten how to do, learning from multiple masters across multiple forge worlds, absorbing each discipline, then departing before the local hierarchy understood what it had taught him. Mars, Risa, Antioch, Bellicane, Verica 7, Trisolian A4. Each world contributed to an accumulation that no single institution could track, because no single institution ever had complete visibility over his record. He specialized in bioengineering from the beginning. The human genome, the augmentation of flesh, the engineering of life from raw genetic material. This was always where his curiosity ran deepest. The version of Cawl that exists in M42 is something different from that young tech acolyte. Millennia of progressive cybernetic reconstruction have left him a grotesque amalgam of flesh and machine, swathed in Martian red, towering to several times the height of a grown man on a multitude of metal legs, his clustered eye lenses glowing insectile beneath his heavy cowl. His outer armature carries weapons harnesses, limb mounts, a secondary plasma generator, a conversion field that transforms incoming matter into light. His body includes auto-repair systems that snake cables outward mid-combat to effect immediate reconstruction. A privacy field on his back deadens all noise entering or leaving a small area around him, used for conversations he does not want recorded. His mind is no longer singular. He is a composite being, a mesh of souls rather than a combination of minds. a gestalt intelligence formed from multiple absorbed personalities. He calls them subminds. Each is the remnant of someone who once existed independently, now woven permanently into Cawl's intelligence core. He has been memory wiped at least twice. His own origins are partially a mystery even to him. What remains of his archive fills, per the Adeptus Mechanicus's own records, vaulted halls the size of a battlecruiser, Binheric code stacks covering hundreds of Xenos races he helped drive to extinction, schematic details of wonder engines lost since the age of technology, galactic census data from the Great Crusade, communication studies from the aftermath of the Great Rift. He no longer remembers how large portions of it were obtained. His active projects span domains that should individually result in immediate execution. He deployed mere artificial intelligences that his own construct's programming registers as heretical. He manipulated Necron pylon technology in ways that even the Necrons who built it didn't anticipate, manipulated a Catan shard into working with him, then destroyed the device and teleported the construct to the far side of the galaxy while it was in the middle of turning on him. He has collaborated with the Yanari. He has ventured into the Eye of Terror and returned. He maintains a forbidden construct installed 200 decks beneath the flagship of the Ultramarines Primarch, 20 severed servitor heads suspended in illuminated armor glass tanks, bathed in yellow nutrient fluid, networked through hidden circuitry that traces golden channels across the walls when active. Robute Guilliman himself suspects this construct is a genuine abominable intelligence and has never been able to prove it isn't. He created Alpha Primus. Per confirmed canon, Alpha Primus was built in an attempt to recreate the process the Emperor of Mankind used to engineer the Primarchs before the Great Crusade, working backward from the Emperor's own original methodology to understand the template well enough to exceed it. The process couldn't produce a Primarch. It produced Alpha Primus instead, a space marine more extensively modified than any standard Primaris, an unprecedented psyker in Astartes history, permanently in pain from the imperfect genetic reconstruction, personally loyal to Cawl rather than to the Emperor or the Imperium, serving now as his private agent and enforcer. The significance of Alpha Primus isn't that Cawl succeeded, it's what the attempt required. To extrapolate backward from the Primarch engineering process with enough precision to attempt recreation, you need a comprehensive model of that process. Not a partial one, not a degraded copy. Every original design, every genome, every intervention the Emperor made in his subterranean genetic laboratories beneath the Imperial Palace during the Unification Wars. Cawl had that model. The question is how he obtained it. The answer to that question is a man named Ezekiel Sedane. Sedane was the second director of the Biotechnical Division, the imperial body whose specific institutional mandate was the creation and improvement of the genetic lines of the Legiones Astartes. Not some of them, all of them. He was, in the functional terms of his role, the chief custodian of the genomic architecture of everything the Emperor built under the banner of the Adeptus Astartes. His subordinates maintained the gene tithes, tracked the biological integrity of each legion's inheritance, and kept the original templates accessible for ongoing refinement. Sedane himself had regular contact with the Emperor's inner research cadres. He had seen the Emperor's work at its source. 20 Primarchs, 20 gene lines, the complete original blueprint. By the time Cawl encountered him, Sedane was dying. His body had stopped responding to rejuvenate treatments. The man who had spent a lifetime maintaining the genetic architecture of the Emperor's armies was at the end of his biological road, and he had made a decision about how to prevent that from happening. He arranged for Cawl to be escorted to Terra. He wanted Cawl's mastery of soul-merging technology, the technique that allowed one consciousness to be digitally transferred and merged with another. Sedaine intended his own psyche to emerge dominant from the procedure. He expected to continue his work indefinitely, in a borrowed body, with Cawl's expertise absorbed into his own intelligence. He had even threatened the life of Cawl's companion, Friedish, to ensure compliance. The procedure didn't work as Sedaine planned. Cawl's mind was stronger. Sedaine's personality was overpowered and absorbed rather than triumphant, becoming one of the composite subminds Cawl has carried ever since. Present, functional, capable of being accessed but no longer dominant. His memories survived the merger. His 40 years of institutional knowledge, every gene line he had overseen, every classification he had worked under, every record in the biotechnical division's vaults, those survived too. They became part of Cawl's archive. Upon awakening from the procedure, Cawl relived one of Sedaine's oldest memories, a meeting with the Emperor during the Unification Wars. In that memory, the Emperor addressed Sedaine not by his own name but as Belisarius Cawl, predicting, with psychic prescience measured in centuries, what would eventually happen to Sedaine's knowledge and who would carry it forward. He spoke through the memory directly to the future version of Cawl, across the gap of decades that had not yet passed. An instruction to continue the work, even on the day Cawl believed he had betrayed everything the Emperor stood for. The young Cawl was horrified by the idea of ever betraying the Emperor. He has been carrying the instruction ever since. What this means in practical terms: the man who maintained all 20 Primarch gene lines as his specific institutional function is now a permanent resident of Cawl's composite mind. Sedaine knew the gene craft architecture of the 2nd and 11th Legions from both ends, from the original templates in the Emperor's own research apparatus, and from 10,000 years of subsequent biotechnical division records tracking what those gene lines had produced. He knew them the way an archivist knows the contents of a vault he has spent his working life managing. And Cawl absorbed him the way the vault absorbs a key. Whatever Sedaine knew about the Lost Primarchs' gene craft has been inside Cawl's composite mind for 10,000 years. Cawl isn't a secretive being. This is the forensic heart of the entire case. His canonical personality, consistent across every source that depicts him, is one of deliberate and almost theatrical disclosure. He openly admits to innovation in a culture that treats innovation as the gravest possible heresy. He operates near-artificial intelligences, while informing Guilliman they aren't artificial intelligences, and banking on the Primarchs' reluctance to press into territory neither of them wants to formally acknowledge. He committed to Xenotech alliance with the Inari during the Gathering Storm, when the Imperium was crumbling, and explained the decision rather than hiding it. He has built experimental configurations of ancient devices, installed them on the Macragge's honor against the Adeptus Mechanicus's explicit objections, silenced the objectors by getting Guilliman's backing, and produced results so effective that even the hostile tech priests couldn't mount a successful challenge. His stated philosophy, repeated across multiple records of his speech: the Omnissiah filled the galaxy with mysteries so that we might learn from them, coming step by step closer to his perfect being. To ignore them, even in the face of war, is heresy. When a subordinate in the Genefather campaign says to him directly, "You openly admit to innovation," Cawl's response is a snort, the sound of a man for whom the accusation doesn't register as an accusation at all, but as a description so obvious it barely merits acknowledgement. The Cawl inferior operates as a faithful mirror of this personality. In the sealed chamber on the Macragge's honor, that construct has conducted extended conversations with Guilliman about whether the Emperor is a god, treating the question as an open intellectual matter to be weighed on evidence rather than as forbidden theology. It has proposed using the gene seed of every traitor legion to improve future Primaris generations, delivered the proposal in measured administrative language, received Guilliman's refusal, and repeated the proposal at the next opportunity. It characterizes the Adeptus Mechanicus of M42 as far more constrained in its thinking than the Mechanicum of Guilliman's own era, openly dismissing Mechanicus orthodoxy to its most powerful political patron, in a room with no witnesses beyond the astropath who activates the device and then leaves. The construct will lie to Guilliman. Guilliman knows this. He watches it activate 20 servitor heads in tanks, watches them mouth everything the machine says in silent unison, and accepts that he can't determine whether the intelligence he is speaking to is what it claims to be. He has kept it running for decades rather than disassemble it, because too much of his relationship with Cawl runs through that chamber. Cawl discusses heretical technology, forbidden alliances, dead god theology, near artificial intelligence, and the genetics of men who tried to overthrow the Emperor 10,000 years ago. His inferior proposes breeding new Astartes from the gene lines of traitors. He commits tech heresy in plain sight and justifies it in the same breath. Now look for the same conduct regarding the 2nd and 11th legions. Across 10,000 years of imperial history, through the Gathering Storm, the Terran Crusade, the Indomitus Crusade, the Expedition to Sotha, the Pariah Crusade, and every recorded encounter and conversation Cawl has been party to, there is no record of him speaking about the Lost Primarchs. Not a reference, not a knowing aside, not a moment where someone in his presence raises their numbers and Cawl goes quiet in a way anyone noticed enough to write down. The absence is total. The subject does not appear in his recorded speech at all. Absence means different things depending on who isn't speaking. Malcador the Sigillite, who was present for the erasure decision and who kept skulls marked with the numbers 2 and 11 among his private collections in the dungeons of the Emperor's palace, carried the knowledge as a kind of mute testimony, visual reminders of specific individuals whose existence he had helped consign to silence. Rogel Dorn and Robute Guilliman, who requested the psychic memory alteration of the surviving Primarchs alongside Malcador's participation, observed the silence of men who made a decision they have decided was probably correct and have no interest in revisiting it. A Space Marine who had his memories altered against his will observes a silence that was inflicted on him from outside. Cawl's silence has none of those explanations available to it. He made no part of the original decision. He wasn't in the room. He carries the knowledge by accumulation, not by complicity in the act of erasure. He has no institutional loyalty to the silence. The Adeptus Mechanicus, as it exists in M42, would find the truth about the Lost Primarchs no more disturbing than any of the other things Cawl has already disclosed and justified. He has no reputation to protect by staying quiet. His reputation is built on calculated disclosure at moments of his own choosing. The silence on this specific subject, from a being who discusses almost everything else, is a choice made with full knowledge and held with complete discipline. 100 centuries of it. Not a slip, not an aside, not a hint extracted by an inquisitor, a primarch, or a subordinate tech priest who asked the wrong question at the wrong moment. The connection between what Cawl knows and what the silence protects runs through the biological architecture of the Adeptus Astartes itself. Every Space Marine traces his identity back to a Primarch. Gene seed is the medium through which that inheritance passes. Viral machines that rebuild the male human body according to the genetic template encoded within them. The template has one original source, the Primarch's genome, engineered by the Emperor beneath the Imperial Palace during the Unification Wars, using knowledge he had extracted from a bargain struck on the world of Molech with entities no imperial institution has ever wanted to formally name. 20 Primarchs, 20 gene lines. The entire Astartes edifice is, at its foundation, a map of 20 original designs made from a single man's DNA and 20 different expressions of what that DNA could become. The 2nd and 11th legions existed. Their Primarchs were found during the Great Crusade, reunited with the forces created from their gene templates, and fought in campaigns that included the Rangdan Xenocides alongside Lion L. Johnson. At some point before the Horus Heresy, both were expunged. Imperial records list Legions 2 and 11 with their entries marked as expunged or destroyed. The Primarchs of the remaining legions had their memories psychically altered, an intervention conducted or sanctioned by the Emperor himself, with Malcador's involvement, following a request from Dorn and Guilliman. By the time the Horus Heresy novels open, 18 legions are counted. Legions 2 and 11 had disappeared from the tally before the Heresy's outbreak. 20 statues of the Primarchs were erected in the Imperial Palace on Terra. 2 of the plinths, per records from the era, had been vacant for a long time. No one ever spoke of those 2 absent brothers and their separate tragedies. Separate tragedies. The phrasing is specific. 2 distinct events, not a single incident. Whatever ended them happened at different moments and apparently for different reasons. Gene seed does not vanish because you erase records. The biologist vaults on Mars held genetic material from every legion the Imperium had ever fielded. Whether the 2nd and 11th gene ties were destroyed when their legions were expunged is a question that Imperial records deliberately leave open. No source confirms destruction, and none confirms preservation. The silence on the fate of those gene ties mirrors the silence on everything else about the Lost Primarchs. Cawl's Primaris project required working from original templates rather than the degraded copies that had been propagating for 10,000 years. The Primaris gene seed, per the Codex material, shows only a 0.001% chance of genetic deviancy from the original baseline with the passage of each generation, a precision that implies access to source material more intact than anything a standard chapter's apothecarian would hold. The project involved, per multiple records, countless experimental iterations across many gene lines. Sedane's absorbed institutional knowledge covered all 20 gene lines by the specific terms of his directorial function. Alpha Primus required working backward from the Emperor's complete Primarch engineering methodology, which meant modeling all 20 original outputs. What the conversation in that chamber suggests isn't purely inferential. In the sealed chamber on the McCragg's honor, past the gene-locked elevator with weapons primed to kill any intruder, past 3 interleaving sets of doors made of meter-thick bonded hex steel, past the security protocols that tested Guilliman's body and mental state and spiritual aura before allowing descent. The Cawl inferior delivered a status report that Guilliman had not asked for and couldn't immediately refuse to hear. The construct raised the topic of the Traitor Legion's gene seed, testing it, using it, putting it into production for future Primaris generations. The proposal's logic was cold and consistent with everything Cawl had been doing for 10,000 years. The fault lay with the Primarchs, not with their genomes. The legions themselves had not failed. Their genetics, separated from the choices their masters had made, could still serve the Imperium in the manner the Emperor intended. Guilliman refused, with increasing force, and his confidence that the Cawl inferior would actually honor that refusal was, by his own reckoning, limited. The research had already been completed before the refusal was delivered. The testing was done. Cawl already knew the result, and the structural logic of that result, extended to gene lines that were erased before the heresy even began, is more dangerous than failure would have been. Sanguinius understood this logic precisely. In the years before the heresy, when Horus confronted him about the Blood Angel's red thirst and asked why he had never sought the Emperor's help, the angel's answer was immediate and absolute. "I won't be responsible for the erasure of the Blood Angels from Imperial history.
I won't have a third empty plinth beneath the roof of the hegemon as my legion's only memorial."
Third plinth. The first two were already vacant when he spoke those words. He had seen what the Emperor would do with a gene seed flaw that couldn't be corrected. He had drawn the only rational conclusion. Cawl's argument about the traitor legions applies with equal force to the Lost Primarchs. 10,000 years of expungement doesn't corrupt a genome. If the fault lay with the Primarchs rather than with the gene lines they left behind, the same logic extends to two legions erased before anyone had gone near the Eye of Terror. Whatever the Emperor removed those legions for, the genome wasn't the reason. The reason for the erasure was something else entirely.
Something in who the Lost Primarchs were,
what they did or believed or knew, what they had done or were about to do. Something that required not just their removal, but the psychic alteration of every surviving witness, the destruction of every accessible record, and the installation of oaths among the remaining Primarchs, never to speak of them again. Something the Emperor judged so dangerous that he rewrote his son's memories to keep it contained. Cawl has spent 10,000 years studying these gene lines. He carries Sedane's institutional knowledge of their origins. He has worked at the intersection of every original Primarch gene line in the Emperor's archive and evaluated what was there. He attempted to reverse engineer the complete Primarch engineering methodology. He arrived at whatever conclusion 10 millennia of comprehensive genecraft research into this specific question produces, and he hasn't shared it. Cawl's mandate comes from Guilliman, not the Emperor.
but the character of the two obligations is entirely different,
and the difference explains the shape of the silence. After the heresy, Guilliman, then Lord Commander of a barely surviving Imperium, charged Cawl with two responsibilities: the construction of the armor of fate and the creation of what would eventually become the Primaris Project. Both were Guilliman's orders, issued before the Primarch took his wound at the Battle of Thessala in M31 and was placed in the stasis field in the Temple of Correction. Cawl received those orders, acknowledged them, and then operated on them without oversight for 10,000 years. The Emperor's contribution to Cawl's operation is older and stranger. In Sedane's absorbed memory, the Emperor addressed the future Cawl by name hundreds of years before Cawl existed, at a moment when Sedane was still the one who carried the knowledge.
He gave Cawl an instruction not through a formal, sealed decree, but through a prophetic vision embedded in the memory of a man Cawl would eventually absorb. An instruction to continue the work, even on the day Cawl believed he had betrayed everything the Emperor stood for. For 10,000 years, this has been Cawl's operating charter. Not a document, not a sealed order he can cite to an inquisitor. A spoken expectation from a prescient god, transmitted through second-hand memory, that Cawl has treated as the only authority that ultimately matters. He acknowledged no update from the Emperor for 10 millennia because the Emperor has been incapable of issuing one. He acknowledged no competing authority, not the Mechanicus hierarchy, not the High Lords, not the Inquisition, because none of them had the standing in his operational framework that Guilliman's ancient commission and the Emperor's buried instruction jointly represented. The practical consequence of this framework is demonstrated by the Primaris project itself. Guilliman commissioned it. He expected its completion. For 10,000 years, Cawl was completing it in secret, not because Guilliman ordered secrecy, but because Cawl decided unilaterally what Guilliman needed to know at each stage and when that disclosure should occur. He withheld the full scope from Guilliman for the entire duration. He withheld Alpha Primus. He withheld the Cawl inferior's capabilities in ways Guilliman still can't fully assess. Each element was disclosed at a moment Cawl had selected in advance, timed for maximum strategic impact, presented at the point where refusal was most difficult. The revived Primarch, the collapsing Imperium, the introduction of Primaris Marines as the only viable reinforcement for a galaxy on fire. This is the operating pattern. Cawl holds information. He assesses it. He determines when disclosure serves the mission as he understands it, and he withholds until that moment arrives. If the threshold he has set is the Imperium being ready to survive the information, stable enough, strong enough, far enough from the edge of collapse that the truth of what the Lost Primarchs were doesn't bring the structure down along with the revelation, that threshold may be 10,000 years away from being met, or it may never be met. And Cawl, who has spent 10,000 years in close enough proximity to the question to have developed an informed opinion about the answer's weight, may have concluded that the Imperium, as currently constituted, can't absorb what he knows. Disclosure would require unwinding several layers simultaneously, and the cascade runs in a direction that touches things the Imperium can't afford to have touched. Start with the gene lines. The Cawl inferior raised the topic of unused gene lines with Guilliman, and Guilliman refused.
Nobody with access to Cawl's actual records can verify whether that refusal was honored. Every Space Marine chapter that accepted Primaris reinforcements through the Ultima founding or the early Indomitus Crusade received warriors whose gene seed lineage passes through Cawl's classified archive. Whether gene lines from erased legions have been silently incorporated into that supply, without authorization, in the confidence that viable gene seed from long-forgotten Primarchs would go undetected in the population of chapters receiving new brothers, is a question that can't be answered without access Cawl controls entirely. If the Lost Primarchs gene lines are somewhere in the Primaris supply chain, the revelation forces every chapter to confront what their newest warriors might be carrying.
The Adeptus Mechanicus factions hostile to Cawl, and there are substantial ones, documented across multiple records of internal Mechanicus politics, would hold grounds to challenge the entire Primaris program's legitimacy. The Inquisition would hold grounds to investigate every chapter that had crossed the Rubicon Primaris. Chapters already skeptical of Cawl's methods would have grounds for schism. The political architecture of the post-Gathering Storm Imperium, which rests partly on the acceptance of Primaris Marines by loyal chapters across the galaxy, would fracture at a point neither Guilliman nor Cawl can afford to let fracture. There is also Guilliman's specific position in the arrangement. He requested the original psychic memory wipe of the surviving Primarchs alongside Rogel Dorm. He then commissioned Cawl to build Primaris Marines using GeneCraft archives that, by the breadth of Cawl's research into all original Primarch gene lines, likely included the gene tithes of the erased legions in their scope. Whether Guilliman knew the extent of what Cawl was doing with those gene tithes before the Dark Imperium era report, Whether the Lord Commander who requested the erasure was, for 10,000 years, also the authority under whose broad mandate the erased Primarchs' genetics were being actively researched. That question layers a second tier of concealment over the original erasure. It implicates Guilliman not just as the inheritor of a secret he helped create in M31, but as the unknowing or knowing patron of ongoing research into material whose existence he had helped to suppress. Then the psychic memory wipe itself becomes the most uncomfortable revelation. The Emperor altered the memories of his own sons, not enemies, not traitors, those came later. His Primarchs, the beings he created from his own genome, who had been reunited with him and given their legions and sent out across the galaxy in his name, had specific recollections surgically removed from their minds because the Emperor judged those recollections too dangerous to leave intact. The remaining Primarchs swore oaths, afterward, never to speak of their absent brothers. The people who retained clear memory, Malcador, the Emperor, and the small circle who executed the operation, maintained it in silence until Malcador's death and the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne removed the last individuals with full, unaltered knowledge from active service. A complete account of what made two of the Emperor's 20 greatest achievements require that level of suppression does not merely disturb the setting's mythology. It requires the Imperium to ask what kind of father rewrites his son's memories to cover decisions he made about his other sons, and whether the erasure was about protecting the Imperium from dangerous knowledge or protecting the Emperor's judgment from the scrutiny of people with a stake in evaluating it. The Imperial Truth's premise, that the Emperor's choices in constructing the Primarch project and the Great Crusade were sound and his intentions coherent, absorbs that question very badly. Cawl ran this calculation. He ran it with better information than anyone else alive because he carries Sedane's complete institutional knowledge and 10,000 years of targeted gene-craft research into this exact domain. He arrived at a conclusion significant enough to keep. The conclusion is what the silence is protecting. Guilliman's silence and Cawl's silence occupy the same space but come from different places. Guilliman made the decision. He asked for the erasure. He knows. At some level he does not discuss what the Second and 11th were, and what was done about them, and why. Because he was party to the request that set the mechanism in motion. His silence is the silence of a man who judged 10,000 years ago that the decision was correct, and who declines to elaborate because elaboration would require opening ground he closed in M31 and hasn't opened since. Cawl's silence originates differently. He didn't make the decision. He arrived at the knowledge through accumulation, through Sedane, through the gene tithes, through the reverse engineering project, through 100 centuries of working at the intersection of all 20 Primarch gene lines in the Emperor's original archive.
He arrived the way a forensic investigator arrives at a verdict,
following the evidence past each alternative until one conclusion remained, then assessing what disclosing that conclusion would do to the structure of the Imperium currently resting on the silence. His operational history suggests he is capable of making that call and living with it. He kept the largest military development program in Imperial history secret for 100 centuries. He chose the moment of Primaris revelation with precision that maximized impact and minimized the viability of refusal. He has maintained a forbidden artificial intelligence under a Primarch's bridge for decades, while deflecting every inquiry about its true nature. He is, in the most precise sense available, a being who decides what the Imperium is allowed to know about itself, and enforces that decision with a patience that makes 10 millennia look like an operational timeline rather than a lifespan.
He is either the Imperium's greatest protector,
A being who has examined the full truth, weighed disclosure against silence with access to all available information, and determined that silence is the answer that keeps the structure standing. Or he is its greatest liar, a being who has decided, without mandate from any living authority, that he knows what 1,000,000,000,000 souls can and can't survive knowing, and has been enforcing that judgment while the Imperium burns around him. The two characterizations sit alongside each other permanently, without resolving. The empty plinths in the imperial palace have been vacant for a long time. Belisarius Cawl has answered questions that should have killed him to ask. He has unsealed knowledge the Mechanicus would have burned him for. He has rebuilt the Space Marines and raised a Primarch from death. There is almost nothing the Archmagos won't eventually speak on, except one thing.
On the fate of the Second and the 11th,
The man who knows everything has said nothing for 10,000 years. Maybe he doesn't know. Or maybe the answer is sitting in the same sealed vault as the secret that makes every Primaris Marine possible, locked by the same hand, on the orders of the same dead god, and Cawl looked at the truth a long time ago, decided the Imperium couldn't survive it, and chose silence. He could end the argument tomorrow. He never will. And that, more than any answer, tells you how dangerous the answer must be. Subscribe for more stories like this.